Hello everyone and welcome to today's online event, Painless Performance Evaluations. It's time to rip off the Band-Aid. Also, just a little bit about us before we get started. emPerform is an all-inclusive online employee performance management solution. We cater to small and medium-sized businesses looking to automate and streamline talent management processes. Specifically, we guide organizations through the transition from manual paper-based assessments to successfully rolling out a more year-round performance management process. We offer a non-modularized software, which means you get a full suite of features to help you now and down the road. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at our website, employee-performance.com. As most of you know, Marnie Green is the principal consultant of the Management Education Group. She is a certified professional speaker, consultant, and author. She is also one of emPerform's favorite partners. She's written 2 books, Painless Performance Conversations and Painless Performance Evaluations. And tomorrow is launching the much-anticipated webinar series, Painless Performance Evaluations. Thank you for joining us, Marnie.
It's my pleasure, John, and thank you for having me. I always like to start with a thank you to the folks at emPerform for inviting me back to present another webinar. Our partnership's been going on for quite a number of years, and I'm always honored to work with such a professional organization with whom I share a common mission, and that is to make organizations stronger and management easier. I'm excited to bring this session to you today because I really think performance evaluations get a bad rap. And today on this webinar, or if you're listening to the recording, I'm guessing you've experienced the pain that often comes along with the performance review process. So whether you're in HR or a manager who prepares evaluations or an employee who receives evaluations, you could probably tell stories about how the performance review process has been mishandled or abused or neglected, and the price that's paid as a result. Honestly, I think the best part about managing is the ability to impact the lives of others, and the performance review is an opportunity to build those relationships and build commitment and skills of our employees. So I believe they really can change lives for the better, but the opportunity is often squandered. So today we're going to look at how to recover if you're in that situation, or if you work in one of those organizations and have felt the pain. Before we go any further, I'd like to get a sense for who's on the line today. So it looks like, Natalie, I'm going to have you help me with the slides. There you go. And that is a reminder that we have a first poll. So I'm going to ask Natalie at emPerform to launch the poll. And this is just to give me a sense of who you are. If you could click there and tell me whether you are a direct line manager, supervisor, whether you're an individual contributor within an organization. Do you play the role of human resources professional? Are you an external consultant? We oftentimes have consultants on the line, or maybe other. So I'll give you just a few more minutes, and when you feel like, Natalie, when you think we've got a good response, we can, if you'll show me, there you go. All right. So it looks like we're just about 50-50 managers and human resource professionals with the with an occasional individual contributor or external consultant in there. So that helps me. Let's go on to our plan for the day. There we go. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty fast-paced webinar, and as we go through this, we're going to explore why do we even do performance evaluations if everybody says they're so painful. And then next, I'd like to talk about whether they really can be painless. What do we mean by painless, and what do you need to do to establish an environment in your organization where there's not so much dread? Then we'll talk about the tools for moving forward towards this concept of painless. And before we finish, I'll share with you some additional resources. So let's talk about, are they really painful? You know, I've been coaching and training leaders for many years on the value of performance evaluation, so believe me, I've heard about the pain. And managers report that performance evaluations can be a lot of very time-consuming. I actually spent some time last week working in Nebraska, and that was the biggest concern, is the system that the organization had was so complex and so long that the biggest pain was they said it took too long. But I think also I hear that the pain comes in because the performance evaluations can be very emotional, that they sometimes help make people not feel their very best. And I think that's oftentimes because of the third reason, is that they're not really an accurate reflection of the employee's performance. Now, there's a study that recently came out from Human Capital Institute, some very interesting research back in 2014 that looked at the state of performance appraisals in organizations. And the study identified some best practices. And they found that 58% of human resource leaders disliked their own performance review systems. So if HR is not happy with the idea, how can we expect managers to use it for good? You know, so there's been always a talk about let's get rid of them. But the same study from HCI found that only 2% of HR leaders don't do performance, or say their organizations don't do performance reviews. So very few organizations are actually heeding that call from the pundits to get rid of performance evaluations. That's really not what we're seeing in the literature. Instead, new approaches and tools are being developed to turn performance reviews into something that's good and valuable to the organization. In fact, this study from Human Capital Institute found that the top reasons organizations do performance reviews is number one, to improve the employee's performance. And I'd like to couch that. That doesn't mean when there's a problem. It means to help everybody perform at higher levels and give their very best. And of course, to help if there's room for improvement. Also, the second reason that organizations are doing performance reviews is to create alignment between the employee's day-to-day performance and the organization's goals. And then the third reason was to help grow and develop employees and their talent. So let's just summarize. Why do we think we should be doing performance management? And that's in the next slide. In my book, Painless Performance Evaluations, I outline four reasons why performance management practices are so critical. And I think the HCI study calls this out. First, it helps us focus on organizational objectives, what's important to the organization, what are we trying to achieve. Second, it should enhance supervisor and employee communication. And then third, for the half of the group that comes from human resources, it helps support human resources activities like selection, promotion, training, and development. And finally, yeah, okay, I don't know that we have any attorneys on the line, but if we did, they'd probably say, yeah, they're also really helpful if we ever have a dispute about an employment action. The performance evaluations are great documentation. But then we always wonder, can they really be painless? That's the question. So let me clarify what I mean by painless. That doesn't mean that there's not emotion involved and that there might not be some kind of conflict along the way between what you as the manager expect and what the employee expects. But what I mean by painless is that when we get to the end of the cycle, the end of the year when you're doing your evaluation, first, there are no surprises. In other words, nothing's brought up that you and the employee haven't talked about probably several times throughout the rating cycle. Second, the idea is that you approach this process engaging the employee. And we're going to talk today about ways you can actually encourage the employee to participate in performance management. And third, performance evaluations need to be more about where are we going rather than where we've been. And I'll show you a little bit about that today as well. If you've been on any of these webinars with me in the past, you've probably seen me refer to the Painless Performance Management Cycle. And that's a very simple model that says performance management needs to start with your organization's goals and your strategic planning. And that should feed into the individual performance plan for the employee. Once the supervisor and the employee are clear about what's expected, they should have frequent conversations. And we've got a whole bunch of information available in my book, Painless Performance Conversations, to guide you through that process. Hopefully you're also keeping some good records, documentation, so that when it comes time to do the performance evaluation, it's a pretty simple process to prepare it, which is the next box in the model, which then leads us to the actual discussion. And you'll notice that the last arrow goes right back to individual performance planning, which means that the end of the year discussion shouldn't so much focus on the past, but should focus more on the future and what the plan is going forward. So let me take a breath and do a poll. And I'm just curious, for those on the line, how painless is your current performance management process? I'm going to launch that poll and pick the answer that seems closest to what it's like in your organization. Is the process completely painless? People love it. They look forward to it. Is there occasional pain, but you deal with it because that's the way it is? Is it a constant pain, like a throb, like a headache that won't go away? And nobody likes it, and it's just it's all-consuming. Or maybe it's so bad it's worthy of major medication. How would you describe how painless your performance management process is? All right, looks like we're going to see some results. That's about what I would have thought, that most organizations would say, we know this is never going to be completely painless, just like going to the dentist. Dentist usually isn't either, but that we have ways to deal with it, and we have ways to mitigate so that it doesn't become a major medical situation. And I think we'll talk about some of those tips that you can use so that people are comfortable doing it. I'm really anxious to hear about the person who said people love their process, and I'm really sorry for the person who said it's intense pain. Hopefully some of these ideas will apply to you. So let's talk about some simple practices that will take the pain out of this entire experience and turn it into something that hopefully improves performance for the individual and the organization. So I have a series of tips for you and some specific takeaways as well. And the first one is that we really need to be looking not at the actual evaluation process as much as we do the ongoing feedback process, and make sure that supervisors are giving employees feedback on a regular basis in between the formal reviews. In the HCI study, 88% of leading organizations said they're committed to recurring conversations and are significantly more likely to agree that they're committed to having these meetings than organizations who are not considered high performing. So how often should we be giving feedback? Well, the HCI study found that about 28% of their respondents said they give it quarterly, and about 25% actually do informally give feedback once a month. But only about 55% of those organizations cite once a year as the recommended interval to meet with employees to discuss performance. So we know that giving feedback on a regular basis is critical, and those high-performing organizations are doing it more frequently than others. Now, this is probably a good time to stop and recognize there's technology available to facilitate this sharing of feedback and to encourage ongoing documentation and coaching. And I know that emPerform just won an award for that. John, do you want to say something about that?
Sure, thanks, Marnie. And basically, it aligns exactly what you're talking about. We have a functionality called Tag in emPerform that allows managers and employees to make journal notes and send feedback to each other year-round. Now, all of this feedback gets stored in emPerform, and it's accessible when they're completing reviews at the end of the year. So Tag's really changing the approach to what we think of as traditional once-a-year appraisals. We know feedback can't wait until the end of the year. It needs to be timely, consistent, and should be day-to-day or monthly or quarterly, as you're suggesting. And certainly, emPerform Tag makes this process of giving feedback and documentation very easy.
Okay. Thanks, John. And what I hear is that's oftentimes what managers say is a big challenge, is remembering to have these conversations and knowing what to do with the information. They just don't take the time to document, so Tag is a great tool for doing that. Let's take a look at a couple of other tips for making them painless. And the next one is that I think employees need to participate in this process as much as the manager. And we need to let employees know that they're expected to play a role, that performance management isn't something we do to them, but rather something we do with them, that it's a tool for fostering that conversation. So here I have a couple of ideas here that you might want to consider in your process. First, tell employees they are expected to play a role. Train them how to carry out their end of the bargain. How do you want them to play a role in goal setting or record keeping a performance journal or a log and using a tool like Tag, providing input at the end of the year? I like to encourage employees to set performance goals and expectations with the manager in a joint face-to-face conversation that happens at least once a year, probably at the beginning of your rating cycle. And then it's those goals that they revisit at least quarterly. I think it's important to revisit those goals on a regular basis and involve employees in amending them as things change. And then encourage employees to seek input and documentation throughout the year. Early in my career, I was asked to provide some input into a performance evaluation my supervisor was doing for me. It was the first one, I believe, with this manager. And he was the first person who ever said, Marnie, can you give me some input? What did you accomplish this last 6 months or year, and what were the highlights for you? And I really panicked because I didn't know that was expected of me. But sure enough, I started a file right away and started keeping track of that information. I learned the hard way that I wasn't prepared. So I think we need to give employees a heads up that they play a role as well. Another way you can have employees participate in the management of their own performance is to have them do a self-assessment. So here's my basic belief, is that it's really not a productive process, I don't believe, to ask employees to rate themselves on a scale and then have the manager rate themselves on a scale and compare. In my experience, the focus of the conversation ends up being more about the ratings than it does about the actual performance. Because most managers have a hard time jumping from, I rated you a 3 and you rated yourself a 4, let's negotiate, versus this is how I saw your performance and this is how you think you saw your performance. So instead, my recommendation is that instead of doing self-evaluation, I recommend self-assessment. And this is really simple. It's something you can do through a system like emPerform or something you can even do as simply through email. And that is to ask the employee 4 simple questions and ask them to provide you their input before you prepare the performance evaluation. First, what were your significant accomplishments? Second, what were your greatest challenges? So you're asking the employee to give you what they think stood out and what got in their way. Along the way, ask them what new challenges or goals they'd like to pursue in the next rating period. And then you might want to leave a question of something like, what else do you need, or what else can I do to support you? And ask the employee to provide this to you in writing. The cool thing is that once it's in writing, you can actually use those specific examples to support the ratings that you assign to the employee's performance. So that's a thought. Let me do a quick check-in with a poll. So on this one, I'm going to ask you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is the highest. And what you're rating is, what is the quality of the written comments on the performance evaluations that are prepared in your organization? So if we want to launch that poll, yeah. So I'm just curious, if we want to be specific with our comments and have employees provide us input, how well are you doing this? Are comments even written by supervisors and managers? Are they provided only when it's required? Maybe they're provided but only by some managers and not other managers. Are they provided consistently? And then the ultimate would be they are awesome. They're complete, they're specific, they're clear, managers know how to write them, and they're meaningful to employees. So go ahead and pick the answer that seems closest to what's happening in your organization. Okay. Yeah, so more than half would say comments are not provided, are provided, but maybe not consistently. A common thing that I hear is that managers make comments only for the highest and the lowest ratings, but then I don't give comments for whatever's the meets expectations. And I don't think that's a real great practice because it encourages managers to rate at the middle to avoid the work. And even if an employee has earned the middle rating, whatever that is, there should be some specifics to support that rating. So let's talk a little bit about how you can take away some of the pain of writing those comments and the ratings. And my next tip is that there's got to be training to teach managers how to describe performance and how to do it factually and constructively. And I think often the pain appears when managers make a judgment, pick a rating, without supporting their rating with specific examples and facts. So I have a little tool that you can use, or maybe you can share with the managers that you coach to describe performance constructively, even if it's a message that's hard to hear. And this is a really simple formula. When we need to deliver news to an employee about something we'd like them to change, just use the you can if you formula. You can benefit in some way if you would, and then you describe the behavior that you'd like them to use in the future. Let me give you a couple of examples. So the next slide, this is what we'd like you to say. You can improve your credibility with clients if you return phone messages within 24 hours of receipt. That would be much more productive and probably catch the employee's attention clearer and with less defensiveness than saying you need to return your phone messages within 24 hours of receipt. Now, as managers, we like to tell employees what they need to do, but oftentimes they won't hear the message if it's not couched with a benefit to them. Let's see another one. And this one actually was a personal example. It actually came to me early in my experience as a staff trainer. I was young, immature, struggled to really understand how I was supposed to work with the support staff. And, okay, I'll be honest, I was bossy. And I think I ticked a few people off. So my boss addressed it this way. He said, Marnie, you can develop stronger relationships with the support staff if you take time to learn about their preferences. Now, what he was really probably saying was, this last part, you should work harder to get along with your support staff. But he knew that wasn't going to get through to me. And so, because there had to be something in it for me. So I really liked the way he phrased that. It got my attention and I was able to improve. He told me this was a challenge to me, but I knew it was important in my career growth. I have one more example for you. So rather than telling the employee that they're not doing well, tell them what you expect them to do instead, like this. You can increase your sales volume if you set measurable customer contact goals and meet them on a weekly basis. That's really better than saying, you know, you're not meeting your expectations for sales volumes on a weekly basis, because the employee is going to defend that point. Now, this is a simple tool, but it helps the employee better hear the feedback, and it's a formula the manager can use to phrase their needs for change to the employee. But I have a couple other tips for you. I think you can avoid even more pain in this process if, number one, in the comments, you don't include anything the employee hasn't heard before. So if that's one of your rules for writing comments, that helps to frame and to encourage managers, frame what they should be writing, but also encourage managers to have those conversations. Second is that they should bring up examples that occurred. You should not, do not, bring up examples that have occurred outside the rating period. So we don't want to refer to anything that happened outside of whatever the dates are for that period. We're not going to talk about what happened last year or 3 years ago. That's done. We also don't want to compare the employee to others. We don't want to say, you're really a great performer and I wish you could perform at the level that Dan does. Instead, compare the employee to the performance standards that have been set. And it's just them compared to the standards. And finally, I think where we see a lot of pain is when managers use the performance evaluation as a warning that the employee needs to improve their performance. This is not the time to do that. This is the time to summarize the conversations that you've had before. So how do we take the pain out of the actual meeting? Well, I have one more tip for you, and it's that every performance evaluation meeting, when you sit down to talk with the employee, should start with one question. And I think if you read the employee to the evaluation, tell them to read it and sign it, or avoid the conversation altogether, you're going to have pain. But if you open with this one question, you're going to have a greater chance of success. And that question is, have you had a chance to read the performance review? So rather than telling the employee what they're not doing well, try telling them what you expect them to do instead. And that is that they read the performance evaluation and come prepared to have the conversation with you. So, for example, you may come into the conversation and ask the employee, have they had a chance to read it, which means you've given it to them ahead of time, and they're going to say yes. It means you can go right into hearing their reaction. You don't have to read the performance evaluation to them. You don't have to even go through it section by section. I find that gives us then a chance to focus more on where are we going rather than where we've been in the future. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, what if the employee gets mad, or what if they come in and they disagree? They're going to anyway, whether you back them in a corner and read it to them or whether they have a chance to process it. And I think most employees appreciate a chance to process the review ahead of time before they come in to have the conversation. It levels the playing field. With that in mind, let's take a look at one final tip that I have for you. And that is that after you've asked that question, have you had a chance to read the evaluation, you want to keep in mind the two-thirds, one-third rule. This is a rule that applies to who talks more, the employee or the manager. And ideally, we want to shoot for this evaluation conversation to have the employee do more of the talking than the manager. Also, it applies to how much time is spent on the future versus the past. And I recommend that more time in these evaluation conversations be spent focusing on the future. So if in doing so, you'll want to follow an approach that is really question-driven, that engages the employee in a conversation about how they view it, and then that you spend quite a bit of time actually using the performance evaluation conversation as an opportunity for planning for the future. So in my book, Painless Performance Evaluations, we provide a 6-step model or an agenda for this evaluation meeting, and it really focuses on asking the employee what they thought of the appraisal. The manager only needs to talk a couple minutes, or not even that, about how they can summarize the evaluation, but they don't have to read it. But then the majority of the time would be spent talking about goals and projects and improvements for the future. I remember with my boss, Mike, the one who asked me to contribute to my performance evaluation, our performance evaluation meetings would probably last as much as 90 minutes. And I know a lot of people can't have a hard time believing, how would you spend 90 minutes on a performance evaluation? But the reality of it was about the first half hour was talking about the previous year, talking about any questions that I had about the evaluation, and then Mike giving me his summary. Maybe not even 30 minutes. But the remaining 2/3 of the meeting was spent planning goals, planning projects, talking about where I could best contribute as an employee in this work unit to where the organization was going in the future. So it really was a collaborative effort, which made them not painless, but actually exciting. Well, I want to share one other resource with you, and that is to invite you to join me. Tomorrow we're going to be exploring these ideas and hundreds of other practical ideas in a webinar series that we will be launching tomorrow. And thanks to emPerform for sponsoring one registration that we're going to give away at the end of this webinar. This is a series of 6 live webinars that are designed for managers and supervisors who are responsible for delivering performance feedback and then for formal evaluations. And we're going to be exploring all the steps in that performance management cycle, including how to set clear expectations, how to develop goals with employees, how to document performance examples and rate performance fairly, a lot more tips on how to write constructive comments, and then quite a bit of time talking about how you lead that performance review meeting using the 2/3, 1/3 rule. And if you register for the series, of course you'll need to do that today or first thing tomorrow, you'll also receive access to all of the recordings for up to a year. So a lot of organizations then are using these recordings in training programs like through their learning management system, through brown bag sessions, coaching sessions. It's really an incredible resource that I hope you won't miss. If you're interested in the webinar series, you can find details at my website, managementeducationgroup.com. Just go under Products, Live Webinar Series, and you'll find all the details. I think this would be a good time to give away one of the registrations as well as a couple copies of the book. So, John?
Thank you, Marnie. Phenomenal content and great tips as always. Just before we get to the questions, let's see who the winner is. So the winner of an all-access pass to this webinar series, as well as a copy of both of Marnie's books, is Diane Stokeham. Congratulations, Diane. You will receive an email after today's event with the details needed to collect your prizes.
Awesome. Congratulations, Diane. I look forward to having you either on the line live or getting your feedback on those recordings. You'll have access for a year. You know, I think this is probably, John, I threw a lot of stuff out there, just lots and lots of ideas and probably a lot very fast. So I'd love to just open up the line for questions and have conversation with the folks that are on the line about the questions they might have about how to take the pain out of performance evaluations. So if you have questions, could you type them? I think you guys want to have them typed into the question box.
That's right, Marnie. If they go ahead and type them into the question box, we will shoot them out to you. And we've got a few questions here already, so I'll pose the first one, and you can go ahead and answer it, and we'll keep them coming, Marnie. What if I'm trying to get the employee to participate in the review meeting and they don't have much to say?
Yeah, we all kind of, I think, at one time or another in our careers as managers run into those employees who just don't want to play. And that happened to me really early in my career with an employee who just wanted to come in and do his work, and any effort that I made to try to engage him was met with kind of a brick wall. And so I had to put some parameters around it. I knew that if I just kept asking and asking and asking and asking, it wasn't getting anywhere. So I made a rule for myself, and that was to ask the question, okay, what else? Or some form of that question, and to ask it 3 times before I left a subject. So I might say something like, so what did you think about your performance evaluation? And if he said, that was fine, I'm going to ask another question that's related to that. Okay, well, what stood out for you? And if he said nothing, it was what I expected, I'd say, okay, well, what was the biggest surprise that you found in that performance evaluation? And he might say, well, I'm surprised I didn't get more of a raise. I wouldn't let that go. I would say, what else? And so at least 3 times, I'm going to ask, excuse me, for the employee's input. And I find that phrase, what else, and making sure that you give yourself at least 3, lets the employee know you don't really want them to, you're not going to let them off the hook, or at least not let them off the hook right away. And one of the biggest errors that I find is managers let the employees off the hook pretty fast. They ask one question, or they ask a very closed-ended question. When the employee doesn't participate, the manager pursues their own agenda. And that right away sets up a dynamic where the employee is not likely to want to contribute to this whole process. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, Marnie, another question. What are the biggest feedback mistakes you see from managers?
Well, I think the biggest one, and this is more of a concept or a mindset, is that you're giving feedback because you want to make the employee change or help make the employee do something different, when in reality our mindset needs to be that we're providing this information in order to help the employee. So it's really about what is the intent that you're giving that feedback around, and do it with a, I like to think of it as a very open heart, or with the intent to help. And because if it's with the intent to try to make our lives easier, or to resolve conflicts or something, and we're going to tell them how to do it, it often comes out as, here's what you need to do. And to me, that's not going to be productive and constructive feedback if it's not phrased in a way that appeals to the employee or something that's important to the employee. Does that help?
That's great, Marnie. Thank you. Just a note for some people asking, yes, slides and video will be sent out. Another question here, Marnie. They keep coming in. So, can we disconnect performance evaluation from a financial raise, and if so, how?
Yeah, you know, in my consulting work, that's always something that I recommend, and this HCI study that I quoted earlier also recommends that as well. That if you really want the performance review process to be focused on the employee's performance, separating that out from compensation decisions and compensation conversations is really important. So I don't know how that works with your budgeting process and you know, the logistics within your organization, but if at all possible, if you can have the performance review season or those decisions and those conversations happen at a different time than compensation. So for example, the organization that I was working with last week wants to do this as well. So they're looking at revamping their system so that evaluations are delivered, let's say, in June. But their pay matrix and how that will apply, the pay for performance structure, won't even be agreed upon and established by their management team until August, which is part of their budgeting process. So they've had to do some alignment between the two systems, the process of evaluation and the process of budget. But the nice thing is that the supervisors can focus on performance and not have to worry about how much is this worth. And then when those pay decisions come down, it's a separate conversation. Highly, highly recommended, because that way the focus truly is on performance.
Thanks, Marnie. Next question. What if you're giving feedback, but you know the employee is not buying into it and doesn't really see the behavior as a problem?
Yeah. The question is always, what is the impact of this behavior on something bigger than the employee? So in other words, how is it affecting the workplace? How is it affecting customers? How is it affecting the team? Or if they don't get that, how is it affecting that employee's credibility, their ability to be successful? There's got to be a link to something bigger than just the supervisor thinking that the employee needs to change. And I think that's sometimes hard. We don't take the time to clarify that before we open our mouths and start getting feedback. And then it's a hard sell. But I'll be honest, I know reality is you can frame it as productively as possible and explain to the employee how this is in their best interest to change. And if they still agree that they're not willing to, then the question is what's the impact on them in terms of their career? Are there any consequences if they don't change? So in my experience, the two reasons why employees don't usually take the feedback is, number one, it's not framed in a way that shows what's in it for them, and two, there's no consequence if they don't change.
Okay. Marnie, another question. How do you feel about forced rankings or forced distributions in performance reviews?
Yeah, this is definitely a debate, and one that, you know, it really depends on the culture of your organization. But generally, we're finding that the use of forced rankings or forced distributions it's a dying trend. So for those who may not know what that means, that's the idea that we would mandate as an organization that a certain percentage of people will get the lowest rating and only a few small percentage can get the highest rating, and that the majority of employees are going to fall somewhere in the middle of your range. Now that sounds nice, that you would make it easy if we knew that I had so many I had to put at the high and so many at the low and everybody else was just in the middle. But what we found is that in the organizations that have gone that way, it's really detrimental to culture because it rewards just a few, and eventually if you've got really high performers, you end up with high performers on the low end with the intent of getting rid of them, which isn't good either. A 2012 study found that only 13% of organizations are actually doing this anymore. And back in 2002, it was up over 64%. So that idea of forcing employees into a bell curve is an idea that's past its time, if you will. And if your organization is still considering it, I would highly recommend that you look into some of the research that's being done now about the impact of that on culture and look at the alternatives to that.
Okay, and another question is, how do you feel about getting rid of performance evaluation and substitute it with something else? If you're in favor, what can it be substituted with?
Yeah, this is a hot question. In fact, I just wrote an article about this that'll come out next month because everybody's wanting to know, well, we don't like performance evaluations, and there's been books written that says, abolish the performance evaluation or get rid of the performance evaluation. But the reality of it is, there's only 2% of organizations that are really doing that. I like the idea of getting rid of that judgment, that annual, let me put a number on you so that I can apply a pay raise, and focusing more on everyday conversations and feedback. But it seems to me that if we get rid of that formal process and we only do the day-to-day conversations without some way to capture that content, then there's no evidence of what the employee has performed for their benefit or for the organization's benefit. So there are a number of organizations that are moving to this idea of everyday performance management. A great case study that is being recognized now in the literature is from Cargill. Cargill has actually gone from a regular, what we would say is a traditional performance management process to everyday, which is the premise is that day-to-day manager and employee practices are more critical than performance management than event-based procedures like an evaluation. So they've simplified the process, they've strengthened and done a lot of training around the manager's capability to have those conversations, and then focus more on, not on the labor-intensive, administrative, complex event, but more effort into those regular conversations. But I think if you can do that along with a system like emPerform where you're capturing specific data, then you have at least a receptacle for what the employee has accomplished. And the organization has content that they can use to track who the high performers are, what are their skills, how might we be able to use them in other areas. So I think you can't just get rid of it and not have something. You need to have something that will capture those regular conversations.
Okay, good tips, Marnie. Another question coming in for you. Managers often have difficulty writing a justification for a high-performing employee, and as a result, fail to obtain approval for the higher rating from the reviewing manager. Any tips for those managers?
Yeah, this one's to me is pretty clear. That one's not about the manager's relationship with their employee. That is as much to do about that as it is about the manager's relationship with their boss. And so, I like to think everybody in an organization has a significant other, and that significant other is whoever you report to. And so as a manager, if you are if you're recognizing really high performance on your team and you're seeing really great things throughout the year, in your performance conversations with your boss throughout the year, you need to be letting them know, these are the folks I'm really depending on, and or these are the folks I'm struggling with, so that there's truly no surprise for the reviewer at the end of the year as well. And this can be as simple as at your weekly or monthly check-in meeting, right? When you talk about your goals as a manager, that one of the agenda items is let's just do a real quick download on how your staff is doing. Because your boss is going to need to support you if there's problems or if you want to make promotions. And so you don't want that to be a surprise to them at the end of the year any more than the employee wants to be surprised with their evaluation at the end of the year.
All right. I think that's got it for questions, Marnie.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for this presentation today, and thank you to everyone out there who joined us. If you would like to contact Marnie or emPerform, please do so using the details on your screen. Also, we encourage you to visit employee-performance.com to see other recorded webinars with Marnie. Thanks again, Marnie, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity, guys, and thanks for being on the line. Have a great day.